Tall, silent, and great fight scenes, John Wayne is generally associated with all-American stereotypes, including the embarrassing ones like loud, abrasive, and a little too quick to the punch. Though Wayne's movies may be great, he was only acting. Sorry, had to let the secret out one day. But if that news is too disappointing, don't worry. The USA has a historical alternative for an all-American hero. The polite form of John Wayne. Today, we look at George Washington's top better than John Wayne moments. Before we get into it, thanks to everyone who has subscribed, and if you haven't, well, do it, and we'll send you a 100% free gallon of unbottled oxygen. Thank you! Washington stopped a snowball fight. That may not sound like a big deal, but the snowball fight he stopped had become downright lethal. It all started in Harvard College of all places. In the winter of 1775, Washington's soldiers were holding up there, and in such close quarters, it was only a matter of time before conflict broke out. What most people don't realize is that the colonists saw their states more as different countries than a unified body, and add to that mix the soldiers who were Indians or African Americans, and a disagreement was bound to start somewhere. It started when the Massachusetts colonists started making fun of the Virginians because of their white lacy clothing. Words turned into snowballs, and snowballs turned into fists. As Israel Trask, a Massachusetts businessman and politician who was 10 years old at the time and a witness to the event, observed, "A fierce struggle commenced with biting and gouging on the one part and knockdown on the other part with as much apparent fury as the most deadly enemy could create. Reinforced by their friends, in less than 5 minutes more than 1,000 combatants were on the field struggling for the mastery." Somewhere among the chaos, George Washington suddenly appeared on his horse. He instantly dismounted and waded into the fight where he, as Israel put it, with an iron grip seized two tall, brawny, athletic, savage-looking riflemen by the throat, keeping them at arm's length, alternately shaking and talking to them. Bit by bit, the brawlers became aware of Washington, and apparently, his presence was so impactful that within less than 15 minutes, every brawling American had retreated at full speed from the scene, except for the 2 Americans Washington had in hand at the time, a fact they were probably very disappointed at. If you watch John Wayne's early movies, you probably recognize the tropiness of how nobody but the bad guys gets shot. C- on creativity there. But whereas screenwriters were Wayne's bullet protection, Washington had a bullet protection of a different kind. Oddly, though he was often in the thick of battle, he never received a single bullet wound. In the French and Indian War, 2 horses were shot out from under him, and several bullet holes were later found in his clothes, all from one battle. In the same battle, an Indian chief even commanded his sharpshooters to specifically aim for Washington, and as the Indian chief put it, guns that knew not how to miss, missed. The Indians called it the Great Spirit's protection, and the colonials called it Providence, which was a term used for divine influence or intervention. Make of it what you will, but Washington was never injured in battle, even though he was more than once in the thick of them, close enough for landing cannons to spray dirt on him. And he was usually oblivious to his near misses until someone told him. Today, we see many people getting into fights over politics for one reason or another. From full-on riots to street fights, people are willing to fight over almost anything if politics are involved. Though this problem has been more or less severe at different points in history, the problem was certainly not non-existent in Washington's time. In 1775, Washington went to Alexandria, Virginia to vote for a close friend, George Fairfax. At the time, he happened to meet William Penn, an ardent supporter for George Fairfax's political opponent. As can happen when 2 equally opinionated forces meet, the conversation went from pleasant to ardently angry, and it climaxed with Penn hitting Washington with his cane so hard that it knocked Washington to the ground. Now, considering that George was a whopping 6'2" and actually had some of his regimental men with him, this was not the smartest move Penn made in his life. And this is probably where one of those John Wayne barroom brawl scenes might come in. However, this is where the better than John Wayne moment comes in. Though his regiment was already moving in to defend him, Washington was the one who stopped them. But don't think Penn was going to get off scot-free. Without landing a blow, Washington retired to his lodgings and wrote Payne a letter requesting to meet him at the tavern in reference to their disagreement. Payne agreed, and when they met, Washington, towering over Payne, offered his apologies for what he termed an offense given in an unguarded moment. Needless to say, he and Payne did not remain enemies, and for the rest of his life, Payne cherished his friendship with Washington. If you've ever seen John Wayne's McClintock, you may know the line,
"Fellas my age generally call me GW or McClintock. Youngsters call me Mr. McClintock."
Well, George Washington also had that pet peeve when it came to British negotiations, but he had a more interesting way of handling it. In 1776, British General Howe had pinned Washington and his army in New York, but before Howe attacked, he sent a letter to Washington asking for a negotiable settlement between the king and the colonists. However, Howe made the mistake of addressing the letter to Mr. Washington. In this time, title indicated what a person thought of your status. By calling Washington Mr. Washington, Howe clearly signaled he thought of Washington as beneath him and was not taking the Patriots seriously, which probably also signaled he would not take negotiations seriously. So George's response was, "Yeah, there's nobody here by that name." And he sent the letter back without even opening it. Howe resent the letter back, this time addressing him as George Washington Esquire. And Washington's response was, "Yeah, he's not here either." That letter was also sent back. Probably in exasperation, Howe resent the letter and covered all points by addressing it to His Excellency General George Washington. And Washington suddenly became very available. However, Howe's negotiations were Britain granting amnesty to the Patriots. This deal insinuated that Britain would ignore the Declaration of Independence and also treat the Patriots as if they had committed a crime that required Britain's forgiveness. So Washington abruptly became unavailable again. And that, kids, is called doing it like a boss. If you like that, check out our Unknown Secrets of Fruitcake in the link on the screen and subscribe. Why? Because I told this bunny that for every new subscriber, she gets a carrot. Let's not disappoint her.